Thank you, Scott. Welcome, everybody. I am going to talk tonight about a topic that has come up a lot lately in the past week with clients, both at Seeking Integrity and outside. And I just think it's a always useful topic to talk about sometime, and that's honesty and what honesty looks like in recovery, and what are the pitfalls if we can't be rigorously honest, and some of those issues that swirl around truthfulness. So we're going to talk about that tonight. And basically, I'm going to start with the opposite of honesty, I guess, which is lying, and how lying is a really integral factor of addiction and is a key piece of the pie. Pardon me. So I think it's really important to talk about that. So lying, why do people lie? Why do addicts lie? Several reasons. One is at some point it's just a habit. And one of the common things we often hear our clients say is that, gee, I lied kind of automatically, and even there's no reason to, right? Did you take out the garbage? Yeah, when I really didn't take out the garbage, and even that kind of stuff. But it can build into bigger and bigger lies. And so and I think this is for most people, it happens long before we come into addiction. It's kind of a way of life. Maybe it was a cover. It's no doubt based on some kind of defensive posture, maybe from our families of origin. But in any case, it's no longer serving us now. But it's an automatic thing. And so it's really important for people to have that feedback, for addicts to have that feedback when they're lying, to really point it out and to be accountable and to correct it as soon as possible. So my point is it's just an automatic response. And that's not forgiving it. That's not removing the responsibility the addict holds for his behavior and what he says and does. But we do find it's just kind of an automatic thing that people have to develop some consciousness around in order to be changed. Other reasons people lie, they fear the consequences of what will happen if the truth comes out, right? If our behavior as addicts is revealed, then there are not only does it cause harm to people we care about, but it creates all kinds of consequences that potentially could happen to us in our marriages, in our jobs, in our lives, in our recovery. So there's a fear of consequences that goes with that. I think sometimes lying or dishonesty can produce temporary kind of social and other benefits, right? It sort of eases a situation, or it makes something better, but it's on false pretenses. So sometimes when the truth comes out, it's just that much worse. And then sometimes we talk about white lies or harmless lies, telling the kids about Santa Claus, or saying somebody their haircut looks great when we don't think it does, that kind of stuff, and that gets into these kind of borderline areas. I think it's really important as a goal for a recovering person, myself included, to really be rigorously honest in everything. And that doesn't mean we have to be brutally honest. And if I can find a way to say something without harming someone, I'll try to do that. But I think sometimes, especially if it's another addict or even a client who kind of needs a reality check, sometimes because they're often this kind of delusional system, I think sometimes we have to just say, this is what I see, and really do that confrontation. So what's the risk? We know why people do it. What's the risk? For one thing, it's a huge relapse trigger. Our whole addictive process is all built on lies and deception, and oftentimes lying to ourselves included. And so when in recovery, when we fall back into lying, it really is it's old familiar territory. It brings up kind of old feelings that we've had for a long time, and it means a real relapse risk. It really symbolizes the fact that individual is returning to their old ways. And I think that's trouble in every possible meaning of the word. Another consequence, right? If friends or family find out that we've been lying, it really contributes to that destruction of the relationship, right? It undermines trust, it undermines vulnerability. Any kind of progress that has been made can quickly be reversed and gone away. So I think we have to find out about that rigorous honesty piece. Has a huge impact on those we love. Working our program, programs such as 12-step programs require us to be rigorously honest, and it really takes that. And there's no real gray area for that. I think we have to really practice that in all our affairs, as the big book says. And I think that's a really critical piece, because without rigorous honesty, and I'm not talking about just with other people, but with ourselves, we get in real trouble. You know, we can easily get onto a relapse path if we kind of fool ourselves and really not honest with ourselves about what the situation is. Another consequence of lying is feeling like crap afterwards. You know, we feel a lot of guilt afterwards. At some point, if we're aware of the lie, and we usually are, then we have to deal with the feelings that we just did that. Because one fortunate, but sometimes seemingly unfortunate consequence of getting recovery is that all those systems kind of are ruined, right? The lying, the denial, the thinking that our addiction is doing great stuff for us, we know better. You know, that's the issue of addiction, we know better. And so when we do those old behaviors in recovery, we know it. And it feels hollow and undermining and sad, and it's a true indicator that we're on the road to trouble. It means that we're really allowing that self-deception to take hold again. And it does kind of creep in if we're not rigorously honest. And again, sometimes we need other people to tell us that because we can't really recognize that ourselves. And finally, and this is a point, if people are paying for therapy, if people are coming to Seeking Integrity to be in treatment, what's the point of lying? You know, I've had clients initially come in my private practice and just lie, and eventually, why? You know, who are they trying to impress, and what are they trying to do? They're just kind of wasting their money, they're wasting their time, they're wasting my time, and they're really fooling themselves. So I think, you know, it's just a waste of time and money to do that lying stuff if we're not really being rigorously honest when we're trying to take care of ourselves, whether it's in therapy or treatment or even in a 12-step meeting. So I think that's a really key. So if we have this issue, if we struggle, what can we do to increase honesty and recovery? One thing that we always tell our clients at Seeking Integrity is, if you happen to lie, you know, correct it, and correct it fast, correct it sooner, correct it now. You know, and sometimes in our circle plans, clients will put in, well, if I lie, I'll, you know, correct it within 24 hours, and that's okay. But I think ideally we need to correct that lie right away, because the longer it sits there, the longer it festers, the more we think, well, maybe I can get away with it, or maybe it would be too harmful to really reveal it now. We start telling ourselves stories. So I think the answer really is to be honest as soon as it occurs. The other thing is, I mentioned in the beginning that addicts often have a habit of lying. It just kind of is an automatic thing. So I think we have to kind of really approach rigorous honesty as kind of like a muscle that we would build up, like you would in going to the gym, right? It takes practice, it takes building up that strength. And I think that rigorous honesty, I think, is like a skill that needs to be practiced and implemented and practiced again and strengthened. It's not something we just turn on. It's something we really have to kind of learn by doing. I also think it's really useful to keep a journal, and just a journal of highlights, because what we can do is go back and kind of see where we were at a certain time and see if our attitudes have begun to shift. Maybe we're not being as rigorously honest as we used to be. Maybe there's insights that we journaled about ourselves we kind of forgotten, or kind of are minimizing or rationalizing right now, kind of slipping out of that total place of integrity and honesty. So I think a journal really helps just kind of track that as we go. And finally, to go back, I think that maneuvering that area about white lies that I mentioned before, what do we do with that? You know, I think that does occur, situations like that occur in program. As I mentioned, my rule of thumb is we don't cause harm, we don't do harm by being brutally honest with someone, but we try to match I try to match a life of total honesty that kind of keeps me in integrity. And so, yeah, sometimes maybe I'll say to somebody, gee, the haircut looks nice. And like, oh my God, that's horrible. But I don't say that. And yeah, I guess I'm not being totally honest at that point, but I actually, if I do something like that, I actually try to tell somebody else, not that person that had the terrible haircut, but somebody else. And, hey, this is what I said, just so I'm really accountable for that. So I think I'll stop there for the topic of honesty and open it up. Thanks, Scott.
How's my hair?
Looks great.
Thanks.
Great haircut.
So type your questions into the Q&A. We'll get to them as soon as we can. I do have a couple questions for you about lies. I have heard people say that keeping secrets is another form of lying. How do you feel about that? What are your thoughts?
You know, we talk about lying sins of omission, right? When we don't tell something, that's actually a form of lying. And I think we can kind of rationalize, well, if I don't say it, it's not a lie. But I think we have to kind of think in bigger terms and understand that if we don't say something, that is, certainly not the whole truth as we know it. So secrets, I think secrets are really a destructive thing. My life before recovery was just one secret after another. There was a lot of layers of secret lives and secrets that we were talking in the group today about. Everybody comes to Seeking Charity saying, well, there's one or two things I'll take to my grave I will never say. And I'm happy to report that usually those things come out in group. And that's a good thing, because those kind of secrets to harbor and carry, I find are really destructive, because it's a little piece of myself that's not in integrity. I know it. I may be the only one that knows it, but it's like a constant drain on my energy because I'm carrying the weight of that all the time. So I really try to not carry secrets if I can. Sometimes we have secrets to protect people, we think. That often occurs in relationships. I think it's best to try to put everything on the table as best we can. One of the ways we do that, of course, is the disclosure process, which is designed not to be that brutally honest piece I mentioned before, but more of a sort of get it on the table, to clear the air, start fresh, have no secrets left behind. And I think when we see the effects of so-called rolling disclosures, where people kind of reveal those secrets in a drip, 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 and how traumatic that is for people, I think we can understand why that's not a good thing.
Yeah, now what about, I'm in early recovery, I've cheated on my partner, it's my partner's birthday, I want to surprise my partner with the birthday present, but I need to spend some money. What do I do here? Do I say, I'm going to spend $180 on your birthday present, but I'm not going to tell you what I still probably need to say, this money that's going to go missing from our account that you're going to notice, I'm spending it, and I'm getting your birthday present, but I still want to surprise you with the present. I mean, rigorous honesty extends that far, I think, particularly in early recovery, because otherwise your partner's going to look at that and say, what happened to that $180? What did you spend that on? Did you go to the strip club? Did you hire a prostitute? I mean, I don't know what prostitutes cost these days, but I would think you can drop $180 at a strip club pretty easy.
Right. And if I were a partner, I think I would be much happier to know where that money went, even though I don't know the specific, what was purchased until the celebration. But I think it's a much kinder way to treat a partner, although it's not a total surprise, but I think it's a much more appropriate way to handle it, for sure.
Then you might want to save the receipt just so you can prove that you did spend $179.93 or whatever it is. And even when you go to coffee, when your wife says, how much money do you spend today? Don't say I spent, $7 at Starbucks. Say you pull out the receipt and say I spent $6.58 at Starbucks. Be exact. This is how you rebuild rigorous honesty.
Right.
Dr. Rob writes in out of Out of the Doghouse, and also in Sex Addiction 101. It's not what the cheating person does, the actual act of cheating. It's the secrets and lies that cover it up, that hurt the betrayed partner and hurt the relationship the most. And the hardest thing to do to rebuild the relationship is to rebuild relationship trust.
Yeah.
And that requires rigorous honesty, but yes, not brutal honesty. Yeah. And I have one more. You mentioned circle plans. For those of you who don't know, sex addicts, inner circle behaviors are bottom line sex addict behaviors. If I engage in these behaviors, I lose my sobriety. Middle circle behaviors are slippery behaviors. I don't lose my sobriety, but I need to pay attention because I easily could. And then outer circle behaviors are healthy behaviors. Where do you put secrets and lies in a circle plan? Do you put secrets and lies in a circle plan? And if so, where? And does it vary by person, etc.?
This comes up a lot, as you might imagine. I think the temptation sometimes, and sometimes the desire of the partner, is to put lies, at least, in that inner circle, meaning relapse has occurred. And I think not excusing it, but just the behavior of addicts, that automatic lying thing that goes on for a while that should be corrected and needs to be corrected in recovery. But I think that can lead to problems if it's, do you really need to reset your day count if you tell a white lie or say something? I think a couple weeks ago, we used that example of, did you take out the garbage? Well, yeah, I did, but you really hadn't. So you run and do it. Now, is that a relapse? I don't think so. So what we do, what I find comfortable is to put that, any kind of lying behavior in that middle ring, right? The slippery slope area. And with the instructions to really correct it as soon as possible. But that kind of behavior, as I mentioned in the introduction, is really indicative of, not a relapse yet, but a slip in attitudes and that kind of a decline of rigorous honesty, and it's all kind of shaky. But I think that's where I would prefer to see it, as a kind of a warning sign as opposed to part of relapse behavior.
And then you mentioned for addicts that this is really an ingrained habit. And I remember the first year of my recovery, a lot of my effort went to correcting lies that just popped out of my mouth for no reason. I would be in a 12-step room. I lied to my therapist. I would be in a 12-step room and I would say something, and then I would pause and I'd say, "That's not true. I'm sorry. Here is the truth. I don't even know why I said the lie." But it was such an ingrained habit from 25 years of addiction for me. It took a long time. And when I talk to betrayed partners, they often ask, when is he going to stop lying? And I'm like, well, a little by slow, he's going to stop lying, hopefully. But it's going to take time. So a lot of, ideally as an addict, and I want to reiterate, sooner is better in terms of correcting a lie or keeping a secret. Come clean. Sooner is better. Tell the truth. Tell it faster. That's the motto. But a lot of couples who are struggling with this will put a time frame on it. If you keep an important secret or tell a lie, you have 24 hours to come clean. And I won't get mad at you for keeping the secret or telling the lie. I can still get mad about what you're keeping secret or what you're lying about. But as long as you come clean to me within 24 hours, I promise not to get mad about the delay. If it takes more than 24 hours, I get to get mad about the delay too. So that's a boundary I know that couples put in. Is that something you recommend, David?
I do. Yeah, I think that it's a good way of handling that. Understanding that those things probably will occur. Ideally they won't occur with anything big, but it's often this little stuff where those automatic answers pop out. And I think, again, not to excuse it, but to really understand that it is going to happen. And so to really accommodate that as best we can with that really clear instruction and the goal of kind of integrity and rigorous honesty, but to correct it as soon as possible. I think that's the key.
Yeah, tell the truth, tell it faster. But yeah, we all need to be aware that, just because we walk in the doors of recovery, whether it's a treatment center or a therapist's office or 12-step room, we don't automatically become angels instantly. We're still carrying a lot of baggage and bad behavior and bad habits. And it can take some time. And honesty is one that it really does take time. It took me a year or longer, really, to stop these just ridiculous, random lies that came out of my mouth that were embarrassing when I had to correct them. I mean, it was like, why did I tell them? Anyway, all right, let's get to the Q&A. What role does caffeine play in addiction recovery? I know nicotine is known to be able to keep the addict parts of the brain active, but how about caffeine, since caffeine is a highly addictive substance? Thanks, very good question. We talk about caffeine or nicotine a lot. We rarely talk about caffeine.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously caffeine is an amphetamine, it's a stimulant. If you drink coffee and stop, you'll have some minor, usually minor relapse, or rather withdrawal syndrome. So you'll have some sleepiness, you have headaches, you may be irritable, and so on. My understanding of how caffeine, though, works in the brain, it's quite different than drugs like nicotine and other amphetamines, which kind of go right to the heart of the reward circuitry. And nicotine, and we've talked about this before a lot, it kind of mimics the bigger addictions, if you will, the cocaines and the meths and the porn and the sexual acting out, it's a very similar process in the brain. It's just kind of at a much lower scale. And so if we're continuing to use nicotine, it kind of keeps our brain in idle mode, waiting for something stronger to come along, as opposed to kind of totally stopping or kind of drying out. Caffeine doesn't seem to have that kind of triggering effect. I don't smoke. I used to. I do drink coffee, although I limit it usually to 3 cups a day, 2 cups normally. If I have a 3rd cup, I'm like flying. So I know I'm sensitive to the drug, and I know it does something. But I think it's important to recognize that it's, in my mind at least, it's not quite the same as other kinds of drugs of abuse. So to be honest, there's a lot of brain research going on in these various chemicals. We have, with the scanning abilities we have, we've gotten a much clearer understanding of process addictions like behaviors like sex and porn. It's kind of, we know how they look in the brain. We know how drugs look in the brain. We've known for quite a while. So we're really interested now in how caffeine, if it's superimposed in the whole system, how it looks. But the kind of understanding at this point, granted we have a lot to learn, is that it's a little bit of a different metabolism.
Like at our treatment center, we don't allow smoking or vaping, but I believe we do have coffee. I don't think we have caffeinated sodas, but I think we have coffee there now.
I know there's coffee. I'm not sure about the sodas. I don't think there are caffeinated sodas.
Yeah.
Yeah, coffee is available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My wife and I had discussed not telling anyone else about my indiscretion. But now people I have told before this have apparently started talking, and now my wife is mad and embarrassed and hurt again. I also feel like a piece of you-know-what. Did I do something wrong, and why can I not seem to do anything right?
Yeah, that's hard. These are really, of course, really personal decisions about disclosure, who to tell, everything from the kids to the neighbors to family, and very often we try to kind of encapsulate that information and keep it kind of limited. And I think that's initially kind of a good idea because there's so much misunderstanding of what sex addiction is. There's so much stigma around it. There's a whole lot of shame. And so I understand the need to really carefully consider disclosure, who's going to be told, and so on. It sounds like this is a situation of timing where stuff was told before, and then this agreement was made. And so now there's kind of a breach of trust, a breach of that agreement. So this is a real problem that needs to be cleaned up. And I there's no going back on that. But I think it's a real lesson about communication and coordination of that. And I guess you and your wife need to decide as in a partnership about how you're going to handle it. What are you going to tell people? What are you going to do? And so on. Kind of the cat's out of the bag right now. So I think, did you do something wrong? Well, I think anytime we have something like this that affects either us as a couple or us as a family, we need to kind of work in tandem and collaborate on our response and work as a team. So that there was a mismatch here. So I think, yeah, I'm sorry you did that. That was probably a mistake, right? The second part, the last part, why can I not seem to do anything right? It's like, okay, you made a mistake. I think we need to work and see what can be done to remedy it that benefits both you and your wife. But it's just a little hint of victim here that I'd be cautious about. So, we don't want to fall into that shame or victim place. It's like, oh, I did it again, can't do anything right. All that kind of spins into self-talk that isn't particularly helpful. But I think just owning the mistake you made, it could be said you did something wrong. So what do we do about it now? And I think to really, do a 10-step kind of thing on here with taking a little mini inventory and making amends. I think, and I found in situations like this, if really it's the only choice you have, honestly, but to come clean about this, to say you're sorry, to make amends and then do something, take action to kind of correct it. I think that's probably the best you can do to salvage this situation. Scott,
so David, well, I wanted to ask you a question. is there general advice on who to tell, how much to tell, thoughts like that? Because I'm just picturing, let's say I'm in a relationship and my partner cheats on me and I tell my mother will hate my partner forever. I mean, there's no undoing that. There's no uncrossing that bridge with her. So what do I do with my mother versus my father, who's a very forgiving person? You know, do I tell him but not tell? I mean, what is in, you know, if I want to save, obviously, if I don't care if I'm saving my relationship, I'm going to tell my mother. But if I want to save my relationship, and it sounds like this is a situation where they want to save the relationship, who do you tell and how much do you tell and how do you decide? I mean, how do we avoid this situation? And when do we make these decisions?
Yeah, really great question. I think, you know, early on, I always advise to kind of go small, right? To keep the circle relatively tight, because I found that people make different decisions given their time in recovery. So somebody early on might, out of anxiety, how people react, kind of blurt it out to a bunch of people and then regret it because now too many people know. So I think early on, really it's the people that are directly affected by it that need to know. It's a need to know thing. So my partner would need to know. If I think sometimes myself or my partner might turn to close people, that might include a family member, for support. But I think it's for that supportive thing would be the kind of guiding principle of the decision. If we have kids, generally very young kids, I think they probably know there's some disruption, but I think they're really too young to understand what's going on. However, if you get kids that are, you know, I'd say 8, 9, 10 and up, they're certainly aware of something going on. And if they're adolescents, they're very aware of what's going on. I think it's only, and part of the dysfunction of growing up in an addictive household, whether it's sex addiction or alcohol, from a kid's point of view, is that they feel the dysfunction, they see the dysfunction, but often they're told everything's fine. You know, don't believe what you're feeling. It's very confusing and alienating for a kid. And so I think if they're old enough to kind of understand, we have to put it in, you know, age appropriate terms, but I think it's really important to talk to our children about what's going on because they know at some level. Now beyond that, I think we have to kind of, my rule of thumb would be, okay, what's the reason for the disclosure? Is it for gossip? Is it for revenge? Is it for getting support because I'm in pain? You know, so I'd really check your motives. And if it's for support, if it's for, you know, healing purposes, then I think it's a good choice. Beyond that, I'd keep the circle very small. As time goes on, I think couples kind of find their footing with this situation. And I think then it's time to start talking about who else needs to know. And in many cases, people don't need to know a lot. If there's couples or people or friends that you think would be supportive, I think that's a great idea because all the support we can get, and I think all the transparency we can have. Going back to that earlier question about secrets, you know, in a way, is this a secret? I guess it is, but I think it's also that case where we want to kind of do no harm. And I think sometimes if we reveal too much, like you said, there's a great example, Scott. The mothers, there's no going back from that situation, right? That relationship is kind of permanently burned, and that can happen with people. And so I think we have to just be cautious and choose wisely. And I think it's the same thing with, you know, a gay person who may be thinking about disclosure, you know, to really kind of think in advance of what the reaction might be, and at least initially go to people who are supportive. But I think it's a highly personal choice. I think it needs to be made in tandem with a partner, and I think it needs to be really carefully considered. And I would recommend going slow.
Yeah, except for getting support. Get support quickly from a professional, from a 12-step group where everybody's in the same boat and you're not going to gossip about each other, things like that. That's the nice thing. One of the nice things about 12-step and group therapy, and you know, group therapy is actually protected legally, legally confidential. 12 steps, not so much, but people tend to keep it on the QT because they're there for the same reason you're there. They don't want to be gossiped about any more than you do. So they can be safe, and rooms like this, you know, very safe. They're very anonymous. So thank you, David. So dealing with rigorous honesty then. If we have decided not to tell people about what's going on, but they have a question and they realize something and ask, so what would a person do when this happens? Do you lie, or do you tell the truth to some extent without being totally honest, or do you just be honest but just maybe leave out a bit? Like on something like that, would I say I'm separated currently but not tell them why? Just give them that little piece of information. You could also, I'm just going to add one more option. None of your freaking business. I'm just going to throw that out as a possible response. David, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question because you really kind of captured, okay, we take this principle of, let's be honest and have no secrets, but then we're talking about disclosure, and here are all the possible kind of permutations of that. What could go wrong? What could be going on? I think Scott's addition is a really important one. At some point, it's not people's business to know what's going on. Now, if they've been impacted by it, if there's something that somehow there's a need to know, or if you feel that these people would somehow be supportive to you in the situation, then I think it's okay to reveal more. But if we take a step back, we just step out of addiction for a minute and just into everyday communication, right? If I have stuff going on with my husband, I don't necessarily share, certainly not sexual stuff, with my friends or with my family, there's a level of privacy and intimacy with that relationship anytime, right? So if we move it back in an addiction context, I don't see there's any reason for my neighbor to know about our sex lives or my recovery or my struggles if they wouldn't be part of that knowledge anyway, right? So it's kind of, I think people have a curiosity about this, they know something. Now, if they're affected by it, if they're dealing with, our children somehow, or it's family, it all gets complicated and almost has to be done on a case-by-case basis. But I think so often with sex addiction, particularly sex and porn addiction and chemsex, these highly stigmatized behaviors, there's so much shame about it. We feel kind of like we don't have a right to privacy sometimes. We get embarrassed and we kind of lose our footing. We lose our inner intuition about it. So in these kind of situations where you're struggling with who to tell, what to tell, and all, as just by the 6 or 7 variables here, there's 1,000 different possibilities. I would really rely on your sponsor, on your therapist, on guidance from people in the program to give you feedback on it and see. Because I think in those moments when these are people we care about, or people who are just neighbors, or whoever's talking and curious, I think we kind of panic a little bit inside. And I think it's useful to get feedback from other people on, okay, this is what objectively would be a reasonable and fair and honest thing to do. So
yeah, and I just want to add, like, David has his marriage, and he doesn't call me every time something happens in his marriage, and I don't feel like he's not being honest with me or keeping secrets from me, because what happens in his marriage is his marriage, his relationship. It's none of my business. I don't have a right to know that information. If it's information I have a right to know, like I'm David's partner and David is cheating on me, I have a right to know that. That is a violation of rigorous honesty. But David not telling me about what he and his husband had for dinner last night is not keeping a secret from me. It's just none of my business. So it really, like David said, it really depends on who you're talking to and who's asking the question. Some people are just nosy and have no boundaries, and you get to have boundaries and tell them they're being nosy and to stick their nose somewhere else. So,
and granted, in recovery, boundaries are hard, right? And especially in early recovery, because we're not very good at boundaries. And do we have a right to them? What do we have a right to feel? And it just gets very confusing. That's why I think outside help, help from trusted advisors is really important.
Yeah, I agree. So, if you have a specific situation, take it to your sponsor, your therapist, or your partner, and say, "What do I do here?" So, okay. Question: my sex addict, porn addict husband and I are in recovery. We're 1 year past the most recent D-Day and have gone through all the steps of a therapeutic disclosure. Good. I've recently focused on my own true healthy recovery. We are both making progress, but it feels like I am on a faster pace. I'm recognizing and appreciating the steps my husband is making. I'm also feeling less resentful that he is taking longer. Though in finding my healthy voice and sense of self again, I'm wondering if it will overwhelm my husband, which also ironically, I think it shows that I still have work to do as I'm still focused on how much what I do impacts him. Any thoughts on how to navigate?
Wow, great question. And
Yeah, there's a lot. There's about 4 questions that I want to address in there, but go.
Right. But just first off the top, that's impressive recovery, and congratulations to both of you. I think one of the truths about recovery is that it's a highly individualized pace, right? Some people, and we often see this between partners and spouses, right? The partners and the addicts, where there's a very different pace of recovery, and that's particularly acute when somebody's in treatment and they've had the luxury of working on themselves 2 or 3 weeks, and their partner may be home with responsibility with the kids and all that, and feeling a little resentful that they're stuck with the work while the partner's getting all the attention. So, but my point there is that partners just have a different experience with trauma and seeking safety and trying to get their bearings again, and with their world turned upside down. And so I think there's a whole different pace of recovery. So now at this time, since you guys are both in recovery from addiction, which is a slightly different thing, but I really, even there, as you pointed out, there are people have different paces, right? We've talked about before how trauma underlies most addiction, in my opinion, and different levels of trauma take a lot of different work at different pace of healing. So depending on the circumstances someone might have, it might be slower or longer. And individuals have different styles too, just in terms of awareness and so on. There's a lot of complicating factors. So it's natural and normal that people will be at different paces. Now, the critical thing, I think, from a couple's point of view, is communication. You really have to talk to each other, continue to talk to each other about where you're at. And I think I appreciate your observation that perhaps you're still too invested in how it might affect your partner. That's a good observation. However, I think it is important in the spirit of honesty that we've been talking about to have regular meetings, and I mean daily, with your partner. I recommend at least like 10-minute check-ins. What's going on? How you doing? I think those kind of opportunities to just kind of communicate where you're at, what you're feeling, what you're observing can be really helpful. And I think if you can do it in a way that's free of judgment, that's free of shaming, that's free of stigmatizing, but more, I always like the words kind of curious, to be curious about it and things you observe with no judgment. I think that kind of communication will give you a much more accurate idea of what's going on, if there's something that maybe is a barrier, slowing that person's recovery down or not, or just kind of stay in touch with each other. Because they get different paces, that's normal. And we do start to feel a little bit disconnected and disjointed. So anything you can do to kind of bridge that gap would be important. Now, in terms of sensitivity to what other people say, I think it's, we have to, we've been talking tonight a lot about do no harm, right? But I think we have to find a way to walk that kind of very fine line between really sharing what's really going on with us from an authentic place, and with concern about the impact that might have. But I found, and it sounds like you guys, you're working on this for a year. If a couple has a good foundation, I think that relationship can tolerate honest feedback, as long as it's not hurtful or shaming or stigmatizing or carrying those kind of negative flavors. But I think that honesty is really kind of critical to stay connected, because that's what you're trying to do and recover. So communication, I think it all comes down to communication.
Yeah, I often tell people, usually I'm talking directly to addicts, and I say, you and your betrayed partner are on a roller coaster, and unfortunately, it's not the same roller coaster. And this roller coaster is going to run for 6 to 18 months. And so you and your partner, I'll speak to the betrayed partner in this instance, you're both on a roller coaster, and it's not the same one. It's not the same ride. once in a while you might align and be great, but other times he's going to seem like he's on the baby coaster and it doesn't go as fast. I love that you're feeling less resentful that he's taking longer. You're giving him some space for his recovery. What I really, really wanted to pick out of this was you said, ironically, I think this show, you're worried about overwhelming him. I think this shows that I still have work to do as I'm still focused on how what I do impacts him. And this is the old codependency view of, of caretaking, where there must be something wrong with you that you care about another person. And I just want to say, maybe this is just common courtesy. Maybe you're just a really nice person, and that you care how your husband might react if you yell at him. Or, I mean, gosh, that just sounds nice. Stop beating yourself up about that. You can, and I like what David said with check-ins, you can have this honest communication without berating him. Rigorous honesty doesn't mean brutal honesty. You can be honest, like, sometimes I feel like you're lagging a little bit. And then you can say, that's okay, I'm just voicing it. I appreciate the progress you've made. And that's fine. And he's not gonna, collapse if you say that to him. But if you tell him he's a slowpoke and he needs to hurry up and get well, that's not going to go very well. So I like that you're worried about how your behavior impacts him, and he should be worried about how his behavior impacts you. That's part of being in relationship with another person. We don't cross their boundaries. We support them, particularly in a romantic partnership. We need to support each other and love each other, warts and all. And that doesn't mean we ignore the warts. So yeah, I just wanted to point out, I think you sound like a really nice person, not somebody who's codependent. I hate that word, codependent. David, thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. And if you haven't read Codependence, I'd suggest you read it, because it kind of reframes that whole idea of what it means to be in a relationship and loving, caring relationship. Yeah. So yeah, I think totally. I was thinking one kind of sentence stem that we use a lot. When you do or appear X, it makes me feel Y. So when you seem to be less connected or less present, or whatever the symptomatic behavior might be that is concerned, it makes me feel concerned, or it makes me feel worried, or it makes me feel left out, or what. But I think if you can put the emphasis on what you're feeling based on what you're seeing, that really takes the judgment and shame out of it. It's your experience, and it's what you're observing. But it's not saying you need to do X, Y, Z. You're saying, I'm concerned, I'm worried, I'm feeling anxious that you are blah, blah, blah. So I think it's a really important distinction to use. Very subtle, but important.
Thank you. When a relapse occurs, that's when the most shame and self-hatred surfaces. It seems to me that having a lot of self-love is very important during that delicate time in order to get out of the shame spiral. Do you agree that self-love should be unconditional? Great question.
Yeah, great question. So yeah, self-love is a really critical piece, in my opinion, with this. And I think so many of us who, actually, I was going to say who are addicts, but I would say it's probably true for the partners as well, somehow grew up feeling unworthy, sometimes unlovable, sometimes unworthy of love, unprotected, unsafe. A lot of negative things. So to develop self-love can be a real challenge. It's an important concept that we like ourselves, that we have compassion for ourselves, that we feel worthy of recovery, that we'll feel worthy of good things happening, and feel worthy of somebody else loving us. And so that self-love is a challenge sometimes, but a really critical piece. I guess in regard to your question, and it's true, when relapse occurs, it's devastating. It can be very shaming, and we go in that shame spiral. You ask, should self-love be unconditional? And I think, theoretically and ideally, yes, I would say yes, it should be. My only addendum to that would be what we spoke of earlier. When we're falling into that pattern of dishonesty, should it occur in recovery, we're we're less than rigorously honest. I think we can fall a little bit in old delusional thinking. And by that I mean we can start to fool ourselves. And so we can tell ourselves, I'm just loving myself unconditionally, but we're kind of excusing ourselves or rationalizing or kind of on a slippery slope and telling us it's okay, you should love yourself. So I think just with that, again, I think the corrective action for that would be to be around people who can give you feedback, who can be a mirror for you and reflect that back to you. But in principle, yes, unconditional love should be unconditional. Is that an ideal? Probably. Is that a realistic thing? It's harder to implement, but I guess the warning there again is if we're kind of in a little bit of a fooling ourselves state, then that can be a real tool to power us right into a relapse if we're not honest with ourselves. So yeah, I endorse, for myself, I try to practice self-love, and it's a challenge sometimes, but I also get a lot of feedback from people in my life who know me really well and can kind of tell me whether I'm on the mark or not. So I would encourage you to find somebody like that who can give you that honest feedback at the same time.
Yeah, the cycle of addiction starts with uncomfortable feelings, one of which is often shame, and then it goes into fantasy and ritualization and acting out, and then we start to feel remorse and numbing, and then we end up right back where we started with uncomfortable feelings because we're remorseful, and whatever feeling we acted out to escape, like shame, for instance, it's still there, or loneliness or boredom. But then there's more shame heaped on top of it, and it can really spin the cycle out of control, and we go downhill. It's more like flushing a toilet than just spinning in a circle. But yeah, the place where we can intervene is that trigger stage where we feel the uncomfortable emotion. So I like that you're aware of the shame spiral, and a shame spiral will spin, like a figure eight with the addiction cycle. But yeah, that's where we have to intervene, is with the shames, and self-love and self, esteem and self-worth exercises are very important there. But yeah, don't just jump back into denial with it. Everything's okay, I'm perfect. No, but genuine reality checked self-love, I'm 100% in favor of all the time, addiction or no addiction. So yeah. I do not feel safe being in a relationship with my sex addict husband as long as he chooses to lie to me. It seems a conflict that lying can be a bottom line for partners, but only in the middle circle for addicts. Oh, so okay. So the partner views lying as a bottom line behavior, but the addict views it as a middle circle behavior. How do marriages deal with that conflict?
It's a great question. And I understand from a point of, and you have the terminology exactly correct, right? Seeking safety. That's the trauma that a lot of partners experience, and they're trying to remedy that by seeking emotional safety, to be comfortable once again with their partner. And that's hard if there's the potential for lying, obviously. As we said earlier, that lying normally does occur without excusing it, and it's a responsibility of the addict to correct it and quickly get rid of that pattern as it becomes conscious. But I guess my point is, in real terms, it will occur in the beginning. They're usually not even consequential lies. We're not talking about going out and having an affair and lying about it. That's a whole other thing. We're talking about smaller lies that are often inconsequential. But I understand the desire, and we have this often when we're kind of talking about circle plans with spouses, that they want those lies in the inner circle. And just from a practical point of view, I see it differently, I guess. And I think it's just not practical in terms of actual on the ground recovery. Again, not to excuse it, we put them in the, I recommend putting in that middle circle just because it is a dangerous behavior that needs to be corrected quickly. But there's this, that's a very typical point of contest between the partner and the spouse. So
and this is where a couple can put a boundary in place, like if you lie or tell a secret, you have 24 hours to come clean, things like that. I mean, as a betrayed partner, you can set your boundary. When you tell lies or keep secrets, I don't feel safe in our relationship, and I'm not sure I want to continue with it, or whatever else it is. But I agree with David. Expecting an addict to go from lying constantly to lying not at all, just at the flip of a switch, is not practical, and it's not going to work very well. So I kind of cut you off, David. I don't know if you were done or not.
yeah, pretty much. I mean, I just, yeah, I wish I could make it a more clear rationale for that, because I can see, in an ideal world, yeah, a lie would be considered bottom line behavior, but just in our experience, it doesn't exactly work that way. And again, lies are not something we want. Lies got us in trouble. Lies are a negative behavior that have consequences, and not the least of which is the emotional safety of our partners. And so it's a big issue. But I think the way to deal with that is with boundaries, as Scott mentioned.
Yeah. And he wants to stop lying. I mean, if he's serious about his recovery, he wants to stop lying. And he'll do what I did in the early part of recovery, which is like, oh my God, I did it, and start coming clean. And if you see that at least coming clean behavior, I think that's a really good sign that he is doing the work, and trying to be honest. But it's such an ingrained habit for some of us. It's really hard to break. But I feel your pain, and I understand you wanting rigorous honesty all the time. Of course you do.
Yeah.
And why not? Okay. What do I do about the habits of lying due to passiveness and people pleasing? There's more to this question, but I'm just going to leave it there. Lying due to passiveness and people pleasing. What do we do?
Right. So when we think about people pleasing particularly, and passiveness, I guess, what are we doing? We're kind of afraid to share our feelings and what our thoughts and feelings are about something, because we're afraid it might affect the relationship with that person, or might somehow impact us and be negative, or some reaction, or we might lose that person, or it's usually fear-based. There's a lot of fear kind of embedded in this question, I think. And so I think that requires, I think, becoming honest and assertive. And I think sometimes, again, being careful about when we do that. But people pleasing is a really kind of very undermining kind of behavior. It's not good for us. It's not good for the other person, because it's really it's a way of being that's inherently dishonest, right? We're not being truthful. I once had a therapist colleague who said, if you're being nice, you're being dishonest, just because that's, we're being pleasing. We don't want to offend anybody. And reminds me of cultures that say yes, yes when they mean no, just because they don't want to disappoint you face to face. And so I think it's important, I think, to be as honest as we can in that. And people pleasing is a whole other kind of complicated issue that I think requires some work to look at. What's really going on there? What's keeping you from being, honest, and not brutally honest, but just sharing your feelings and thoughts. And I think that's usually fear. Sometimes it's shame about, I don't have a good thought, or I don't have a authentic feeling, or whatever's going on there. But I would look at the intention and the motivation and really try to correct that, because that's a real problem.
Yeah, I also see both passiveness and passive aggressiveness and people pleasing. All of these, I view them as forms of manipulation, trying to manipulate an outcome, sacrificing yourself in a way to manipulate an outcome. And now I want to get to the rest of this question, David, because this is a parent-child relationship where they're roommates, and this is the child asking the question, and he or she is passive and people pleasing. with the parent, because the parent can kick the child out, and the questioner needs a place to live and can't afford to live on his or her own right now. So I wanted to ask about family roles and how that plays into passiveness and people pleasing and lying and keeping secrets and everything we've been talking about today. And is it harder to break an ingrained family role than to just break it generally?
Right. So that's a great point. We grew up in families. Oftentimes there's addiction involved as adults. We had some kind of dysfunctional family. And in dysfunctional families, we often get roles that are inappropriate for kids, right? There's people who have to take over cooking and caring for younger siblings because both parents are out for whatever reason, sometimes working to make ends meet, but still it's a responsibility of the child that isn't a child responsibility. Sometimes it's a raging father and we become, quiet and silent and say we're totally agreeable because we don't want to get hit or yelled at. So I mean, there's various kind of really old formational influences that create these habits that we continue as we go forward. For people that are passive aggressive, at some point I suspect it was too dangerous or risky to be truthful. And so the truth comes out, but in kind of a sideways angle and in distorted way sometimes. So yeah, I think those family roles are deeply ingrained. I think it's something we struggle against most of our lives. I think with recovery, we can really kind of have awareness and start to change those patterns. But I think those family roles we take, and the hero, the mascot, the caretaker, the person that gets blamed for everything, there's kind of standard roles. And those go kind of uninterrupted until we do something about them as adults, right? Where we go to therapy, we go to some kind of 12-step program, and they start to heal. But those are deeply ingrained ways of relating to other people. And it may have been, avoiding getting hit by my dad, so I wouldn't say anything, but I transfer that to other relationships where I don't say stuff I really should, not because I'm in danger of getting hit, just the way I always communicate. And so I think it's a matter of really correcting those old roles.
Thank you, David. It is 6 o'clock my time. I don't know where you are, but our hour is up. David, is there anything you want to say to take us out?
No, just great questions as usual, and just we've got to aim at that honesty as a target. Keep it going.
Tell the truth. Tell it faster.
Right.
We'll be back next week, everybody. See you then.
Thank you, Scott. Good night.